It's my honor and pleasure to welcome back to the show the editor of the Post and Email. I'm joined by Sharon Rondeau. Hi, Sharon. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. How are you?
I'm very well. It's nice to have you back. I think that regular viewers are going to remember that you joined us not that long ago for the roundtable that Kevin Shipp hosted with Mike Zullo, who people will recall did a lot of work investigating the origin of Barack Obama's birth certificate and a lot of other things there in Maricopa County. You're the editor of a website called The Post and Email, which I hope that people will visit. They can get there simply by going to thepostemail.com. You're putting up a lot of articles about sensitive subjects that the mainstream media doesn't want to touch. Before we get into today's topic, which is something that's become a matter of great interest for me, social engineers trying to attack independent journalists rather than contradicting elements of fact that are presented, I just wanted to give our viewers a little background on you, tell them about the Post and Email and what it is that you do on there.
Well, thank you so much. And again, it's great to be with you. The Post and Email was founded just over 10 years ago by a man named John Charlton. He was a professional writer and most likely still is. Within 6 months or so of his founding, and it was founded around the birth certificate. I'm sorry, not the birth certificate, but the eligibility question about Barack Hussein Obama. Because as of that point, there was a short form birth certificate that had been issued, but not the long form, which became much more controversial. So John and his followers were very concerned that perhaps someone ineligible as an Article II natural-born citizen was sitting in the White House, in fact, had won election and was sitting in the White House. So he blogged about it. It was a blog at that time on WordPress, and it became so popular with so many hits that by December of 2009, he converted it to an online newspaper in what they call like a newspaper format or theme. The paper continued to grow, and as I was going to say, within 6 months or so, he found that the professional writing he was rather obligated to do was being put by the wayside. And he said, this is very addictive, and I'm going to have to stop doing this. So he asked the team, I was one of them, who would like to kind of take over, and maybe we wanted to do it as a group. And there were maybe 4 or 5 other people with whom we were kind of sharing responsibilities. One by one, for whatever reason, and I don't know their reasons, they dropped off. And that left me, believe it or not, I never expected that to be the case, but I really felt that it was important to have these questions about a president's eligibility, regardless of who the president is, Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter. Are we adhering to Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which says that only a natural-born citizen can be president, and what does that mean? And that leads to a lot of esoteric discussions and everything, and it's really not political. So I took it over, and I've learned an awful lot. As you know, I'm technologically probably the least knowledgeable person on the planet, but I've learned a lot about WordPress and how to do things. I've had some great web developers along the way, and we now have a burgeoning readership. It continues to grow, and many guest writers who want to be published in the Post and Email, and we're just continuing on that. Not only the Obama eligibility, but as you said, the whole birth certificate thing is a big question. Mike Zullo was the investigator for that 5+ year investigation, and we still don't have our questions answered as to why a forgery was put up on the White House website on April 27th, 2011. And so there's that, but also in covering the rest of the world's news, or well, really the country's news, but sometimes there's a world story thrown in there. There were lots of other stories that were brought to my attention by honest citizens who had been wronged by a judge, a judicial system, We've done a lot of research and writing about the court system in Tennessee, which I may have mentioned to you before. Other states, I mean, there's corruption in every state, but particularly Tennessee is very, very entrenched in prosecutorial and judicial corruption. That's backed up by public reporting and independent reports and things. But we have done that. We've done stories on child abuse and neglect and child protective services. There's a lot of corruption within those agencies. Millions of dollars flow to those agencies every year by congressional act. And we cover other things, the debate over immigration and whether or not there should be reform and things like that. And really, when I do my writing, I try not to take any position. I'm really trying to be like an old school journalist and not voice my opinion, because my opinion isn't what people care about. And what I care about is people getting both sides of a story as much as they can be obtained, and reporting on things that I think are important in the world of corrupt government.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that drew me to you. You and I have known each other only for a short time, but I've come to respect and like you very much because you are so evidence-based. I mean, this birth certificate issue, it's somewhat of a lightning rod. I want to say, I totally agree with you. I don't know where Barack Obama was born, but strictly speaking about this PDF document from the Obama White House, now we're looking at it from obamawhitehouse.archives.gov. This is still the official birth certificate longform.pdf that's been presented. There's been quite a bit of reporting. I mean, it's obvious just from a cursory examination that the color of the printing of what is ostensibly a hand stamp doesn't match. Just so even the most cursory examination yields a pretty suspicious result here. Why would the one in 1961 be black when the rest of the printing is in red? But there are so many other points of forgery in this document that have been brought to the fore by Mike Zullo and Sheriff Joe Arpaio's team there, the cold case posse that have been investigating this thing. There have been websites that claim to debunk their investigation. However, before I started Crowdsource the Truth, and when I first began looking into this matter, I found a lot of those websites that claim to debunk the research of Mike Zullo, and none of them scientifically reproduced the steps that were taken to evaluate this document, making their results inaccurate. So I second what you've said in that you are strictly coming at this from an evidentiary standpoint, not posting opinion-based commentary, but rather evidence and fact-based journalism. This is part of the reason why I wanted to have you on today, because it becomes so troubling to me when a journalist like yourself, a very responsible journalist like yourself, publishes a story and then the response is not a counter counter presentation of information that would somehow deny facts or elucidate what you're saying in a way that might indicate some sort of error. It's simply to attack you and to take these underhanded type of lawfare measures to try to stop you from reporting. This latest attack from a social engineer comes out of the state of Washington in the form of a formal complaint, an allegation made to a state agency against you personally, claiming mental abuse. Can you tell us some of the details about this, Sharon?
Yes, and thank you for asking. The situation was quite surprising to me, and I'll explain its origins. On August 16th of this year, my husband and I were stepping out to take a quick trip to get an ice cream cone, actually, and the mail truck pulls in, and there's a certified letter from the Washington Department of Public Services and Health, or now I don't have the exact name in front of me, but I had no idea who it was. And it occurred to me, well, about a year ago, I did a FOIA request to the state of Washington, but it doesn't look like that. So anyway, we accepted it and I opened it and I got the shock of my life when it said it was a 3-page, really a 1-page cover letter, and accompanying that was a 2-page explanation of that of which I had been accused. The cover letter had my name and my home address, and it said that you are the subject of an investigation by the Washington State DPS. It was something like that, the agency name. And I had the social worker's name signed and everything at the bottom. And it said you have been accused of, open quote, mental abuse of a quote unquote vulnerable adult, quote unquote. And so with Washington State, they have certain, this is a term they use for apparently someone who may be disabled or elderly and infirm, perhaps have some dementia, perhaps be under not hospital, but some kind of home care, in home care, someone who can't fully care for himself. And I have a lot of compassion for that population, a lot of compassion for anyone, because really we're all handicapped or disabled in some way. And on some of us it shows, and on some of us it doesn't. That's how I think of it. At any rate, so I was shocked. And when we got back from having the ice cream cone, which I really had a hard time having. It was, I think I lost my appetite for it. I came home and I looked at the number that was given and the email address of the social worker, and I contacted the worker right away by email and by phone. It turned out that was a Friday, and she was not in she's never in on Fridays. So I left a voice message and I sent her an email, and I said, in thinking about this, I said, I believe I know who this is, but this is a crazy reason for anybody to report me for mentally abusing an adult or anyone else. I've never lived in the state of Washington. I've never visited. I've never been anywhere near the state of Washington. And I have a couple of readers, or there's one columnist from the state of Washington who sends me a column every week, as he does to some other outlets. And he and I are on wonderful terms. So I could not imagine at first who this was, but the more I thought about it, I said, okay, wait, I think there may be somebody in my mind who might have done something like this, who perhaps has a history of filing false complaints against people. And right. In fact, that's exactly what it turned out to be.
Yeah, and what I wanted to add, Sharon, is that just briefly prior to your receipt of that letter, you had participated in your first appearance on Crowdsource The Truth, which was the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp. We had a special roundtable that we hosted with Mike Zullo and yourself. Mike had been your original source for the reporting that you had done with regard to his investigation into the Hammer, which was presented to him as a system that was used to spy on residents of Maricopa County. Now, it's interesting because in conversations with Mike Zullo, he's told me other things about what they were doing at that time. Everybody knows that Mike and the Cold Case Posse were investigating the birth certificate. So this is a topic that certainly Barack Obama and whoever made sure that he landed in the White House did not want people digging into. So again, rather than challenging that, people have made claims about me that I challenge with facts because the claims have been false. Rather than challenging your reporting on the birth certificate, they just immediately started attacking anyone who had anything to do with the birth certificate. Mike Zullo, Sheriff Arpaio, yourself. But in this case, we were talking about Mike's investigation into the Hammer, and I'm loath to mention the guy's name because it's only going to basically invite more of these types of malicious attacks. But the subject of that previous video is the number one suspect as far as sending this letter to the Washington State Department, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it is. Now, as per Washington state law and agency policy, the worker was not able to tell me who filed the complaint and or if the complainant was the same person who reported the complaint. So it could be two different people. Someone could file a complaint on behalf of a so-called vulnerable adult. I am quite sure it is this individual. I sent the social worker a tremendous amount of information sourced to mainstream news reports. You're talking the Associated Press, you're talking FBI 302 reports, which are out on Scrib. They're publicly available, that emanated from lawsuits and soured business relationships and things like that. I sent her links to that as well as my own reporting, but I sent her more links to outside reporting than even my own. And I explained I have been doing research and reporting, and it's all sourced to these things, including federal judicial published opinions from a federal judge. So I said, is the state of Washington contending that a reporter does not have a right to publish per the First Amendment as long as I'm fair? And I showed her how I was fair, that Mike Zullo did say, he said it on many occasions, that this person had information that proved to be not only verifiable, quote unquote, but also that Mike Zullo was able to, quote, verify it, close quote. So that indicates that this person had some information that was creditable. Mike has said that many times. I have said what he has said because I didn't do the investigation. Mike Zullo did. He did it. And he has the information. So I think we've been very fair, and I absolutely was shocked. Now, what happened was the complaint was actually filed, as I just found out, on July 13th. So it was some few weeks before we did the roundtable with you, Kevin Shipp, and Mike. So it was before that. It was approximately a month after this person stopped sending me emails. He had actually initiated email contact in late October of last year. He was looking for coverage. I think he is upset at how the media has portrayed him. I'm not the New York Times, and I'm not all of these other outlets that take from the New York Times or cite, second hand from somebody else. I've never done that. I've always gotten this firsthand. Of course, I've gone to outside sources, but my source is Mike Zullo. But at any rate, I think I've been very fair. Maybe that's why he came to me. I don't know. I understand that he went to a bunch of, several other journalists as well. And in one of the emails, he did say, what would be wrong with doing a positive, and he used the word positive, story about me? Now, as a writer, I don't do a positive or a negative story about anybody. It's just the facts. If Donald Trump blatantly lied about something, I'm going to report that. If Barack Obama blatantly lied about something, I'm going to report that, and I have. So it's not a positive or a negative story. It's what there is in the public domain. So I was kind of shocked at that question that he asked me that. I didn't always answer his emails. There were many that I didn't answer. I was never unkind. I was never insulting, which was one of the questions the social worker asked me. And actually, when the worker did get back to me and all this, there were only 4 questions. And I answered those. And one of them was, have you had any phone, email, Skype, any kind of contact? And I said the only kind of contact that there was between us was email. I've never spoken in person because I've never been in Washington State, never met this person, never had a Skype call, have never been on the telephone with him, and I never insulted him through email. I offered to send all the emails we had exchanged, and in the end, she didn't even need them. When I sent her the bulk of the information, I sent her following my first email and phone call. That date was September 2nd. By September 5th, she closed the case as, quote unquote, unsubstantiated. And that's the highest level of exoneration Washington State, that agency, uses, because I did look it up.
Yeah, and you detail this extensively in your article that people can read on thepostemail.com. The false allegation made to Washington State agency against the Post and Email's editor is dismissed as unsubstantiated. So thank you for correcting me, Sharon. I had the dates wrong in terms of the sequence of this timeline relative to our roundtable discussion, but that's what I love about you. It's that whatever the facts are, that's what we're going to hear. I should clarify that this person was well aware of your reporting on this matter before that roundtable discussion took place. So it makes sense that this complaint would have been filed prior to that video happening. There was some ramp up in reporting on this matter prior to the roundtable, and it basically came out of a disagreement between Kevin Shipp and Dave Janda. Kevin Shipp was a guest on Dave Janda's show. Some information was presented about this individual, about the investigation that Mike Zullo had conducted that Kevin saw some problems with as he began to look into it. The tension between he and Mike Janda escalated. Mike and other people who we had invited to participate in this discussion and are still, so not Mike, Dave Janda, Dr. Janda, and other people who we've invited to participate in this discussion who are still invited to correct us if we've said something incorrect. They've refused to do that. Now, Mary Fanning is someone who we need to discuss. And again, I want to reiterate to viewers, this is not about calling out other YouTubers. This is not about creating fights. That was an argument that social engineers were using very early on in this process, before I realized what was going on. There seems to be a pattern, Sharon, by which people introduce personalities into this social media sphere. Just as you've realized through your publication of the post and email, the power that each of us have, whether it's through blogging or video broadcasting or any of the things that this technology allows us to do, you've now become your own New York Times. Certainly you may not yet have the reach, but there's nothing stopping the post and email from becoming extremely popular, having thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of readers. And I hope that our viewers will become readers of thepostemail.com and share the link with their friends. But the point is, since you don't have major corporate sponsors who are paying you $5 million a year to write this blog, you can write whatever you want. And in the case that those facts are unflattering, there are techniques that social engineers seem to rely on that are efforts to shut us down. People know I'm being sued. People see now that you've had this unfounded allegation brought against you. Luckily, the false allegation was dismissed thanks to your diligence in reporting the facts to this investigator in Washington State. But it's important that we call these individuals out, because if Dave Janda has made a mistake in supporting the information from Mary Fanning, we invite him to acknowledge that error and correct his reporting. But the amount of digging in that Dave Janda has done gives me great pause. He continues to support Mary Fanning, who seems to be operating in a variety of social media networks, including Twitter. There's this America the Beautiful Twitter handle, which is constantly posting things related to the American Report. It seems to, in fact, be a Twitter handle for the American Report, but I've had some personal messages come to me from this account that are seeming to pose as someone who is not Mary Fanning. So I don't want to attack Mary Fanning personally, but she's got a pretty consistent track record of false reporting. How do you recommend that we handle this, Sharon?
Well, that's a great question, and I'll preface this by saying I had had some long conversations with Mary Fanning, and I liked her an awful lot. I thought she was a very nice person, very sincere. She cared about the country. I'm not sure what happened. We're at the point now where I've accused her of defamation, and I believe that she has lied about me, about Mike Zullo, more importantly about him. He was the first-hand investigator. And I think it's important to not just take someone's word for it because that person says, oh, well, this person photographed me without my permission. Well, what about if the other person, which is in this case is Mike Zullo, has video proof that I've seen, he's shown it to me, that shows this person being videoed, a phone is being held up and he's speaking and he's looking at the camera and then he's looking back at the computer and explaining something. He's aware he's being videotaped. And all of the interviewing that Mike and I have done regarding the level of ability to record that law enforcement has and things like that, we can't just accept anything blindly. Just the way we can't accept an image on the whitehouse.gov screen as a birth certificate, when obviously not only does it have many anomalies that experts found very early on and that Mike's 5+ year investigation confirmed and two other outside forensic specialists confirmed, we can't accept this necessarily. And we see what the media is doing now with this whistleblower and now a
Yeah.
second whistleblower. What do these people know? We have to check. We have to check all angles. And I think what Mary Fanning might be missing, and I wish her well, by the way, her and her co-writer, Alan Jones, I've referred to their work at the Post and Email. I have not removed that. I stand by what I've reported because I'll check it out if I have questions about it. But I wish them well. I really do. But I do wish that they would get the other side of the story. If you're going to say you're an investigative journalist, you've got to get the other side. You've got to contact, whether it's the government or a county law enforcement agency, a sheriff's department, whether it's the Department of Justice, whether it's whoever it is. You've got to get the other side, and you've got to speak with everybody involved. And you can't just throw something out there on the screen that says Mike Zullo misled certain people. That is defamatory if untrue. And if you can't absolutely prove through documentary evidence that it's true, you really shouldn't say it, because that type of thing can lead to legal action. And not only that, it can lead to a destruction of your online reputation. And I don't want to see that happen to Mary Fanning, Alan Jones, Dave Janda, or anyone else. I do wish that Dr. Janda would host Mike Zullo. I know they've been in touch, and I know when I first saw some of the reports come out, I got in touch with them, and I said, there's a firsthand eyewitness to the information this person presented, not Mary Fanning or Alan Jones, but their source. I said, there's someone who supervised him directly and took information to a federal judge and that story. And Dr. Janda has not responded. As you said, he's dug in and he said, well, I stand by these two reporters. Well, okay, but if you're not going to look at anything else, you're not going to have the full story. So, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. There's a lot to learn. There always is. I learn something new every day. And I just try to make sure I look at everything and I make sure that I can document something before I publish it. And I'm never going to accuse a private individual of anything. I go after government figures, but I'm very careful not to name anyone in private life.
And that's very generous of you. The thing that causes me to question the motive is it's not a matter of standing by a reporter. That seems strange. I mean, you can say that you trust someone and have confidence in them, but if they make a mistake, you've got to bring it to their attention. I find it strange that there seem to be these divisions being drawn and these sides being chosen over, I'm going with this person or that person rather than answering the facts. We should remind people that what we're talking about are some very specific matters. It was an issue where there was some evidence receipts presented that did not have FBI agent signatures on them. And when I posed the question to Mary, why do these receipts not have FBI signatures, she told us it was because Dennis Montgomery had had a stroke and was unable to sign his own signature, which was an explanation as to why FBI agents had signed for the witness, but not an explanation as to why they hadn't signed their own names as the agents taking in this evidence. When I asked that question again to make sure it was clearly understood, I got the same answer, which indicated to me Mary Fanning was filibustering and deliberately not wanting to answer that specific question. Further on that topic, she went on to say that it doesn't matter and that Bill Binney had several evidence receipts that also didn't have FBI agent signatures on them. Curious to note that just a few days or maybe weeks later, Bill Binney directly contradicted that statement in an interview with me and then inexplicably refused to speak about the topic anymore and canceled his previously accepted invitation to appear in that round table with us. So I'm not trying to personally attack Mary. I'm just pointing out that she's refused to answer these matters of fact. She glosses over them and insists that I'm focused on details that are irrelevant where I think these are details that are very relevant. And no one that we're talking about, whether it's Dave Janda, Mary Fanning, or Alan Jones, has been able to adequately answer these questions. Instead, they're sending rude emails, they're putting out tweets that seem to bolster their false claims. They're unwilling to go back and modify or check any of this reporting. I mean, certainly that's very poor practice at best from the standpoint of journalism. But what about the possibility that these are deliberate social engineers who are trying to plant false stories?
That was very well put, Jason. I think it's an extremely good point. We as journalists, whether you're a video journalist or I'm a print journalist, basically, we have to be very careful that we don't let our emotions creep into our reporting. I think that's very important. And when you see someone push back and they become vehement and strident and aggressive even, I think that's a sign that they're protecting something. In journalism, you're not supposed to protect anyone. I mean, obviously, you want to make sure you yourself are reasonably personally safe, and we do work in an environment where, I mean, it's horrible in other countries where journalists are killed, and that's tragic and horrible and wrong. But other than that, we want to make sure that we pursue the truth. It may be a truth that we don't want to see, we don't want to know, but it doesn't matter. It's got to be the truth. Someday, I believe we're going to know the truth about that birth certificate image, why it was put up there, why all of this came to happen. There are lots and lots of things that I think I think all Americans should want to know. Some of them are afraid of it. If people are afraid to find out the truth and afraid to delve into it and put it out there, once you know with documentary evidence that that's the truth, you may be shocked out of your wits, but that's your obligation to report it. And I think that anytime people get nasty, I mean, again, I'm no perfect person, but I really try never to anger, never to express myself in terms where I'm angering someone else. I try not to be aggressive or snippy or anything. Again, not perfect, but there's no reason to do that on Twitter or anywhere else. There's no reason to malign anyone else's reputation. And in so doing, I think you really malign yourself if that's the practice that you use. So that to me is a key, that someone is being protective of his or her claims rather than being able to prove them without a doubt. Because if you can prove them, there's no emotion involved at all. You just say, here are the papers, here are the facts, here's what the government told me, and here's what they gave me. So it's all very cut and dried, and to me, it's very unemotional.
Yeah, because this whole matter of the possibility of social engineering came back around again on September 11th. There was a report coming from Mary Fanning having to do with Benghazi. It actually was from several years ago, but it was trying to link Iranian involvement with Benghazi, and I had the Moriartys on discussing this, and they said that there was no evidence in that. People can see that episode on Patreon if they want to check out the Moriartys evaluation, but I just began to notice this pattern where there was a lot of reporting, and again, it's important for people to remember that the tactic here is what's known as a limited hangout. Now, that was a term that was coined during the Nixon presidency when they were so concerned about all this vast, damning information that was going to come out. Nixon said he was worried about having all this information just hanging out. And I believe it was John Halderman, I forget the guy's name, but one of Nixon's cabinet came up with the brilliant idea that if we put out this one sort of shocking piece of information, perhaps people will be so preoccupied with that that we can hide the most damning pieces of evidence. And so this has created sort of a practice where someone can come out and appear to be telling the truth about something seemingly shocking, but they're doing that to gain the public trust and hide the most troubling aspects of what might be out there. So it's important that people understand nothing that we've reported denies the fact that the U.S. government has been illegally spying on U.S. citizens in unthinkable ways, using electronic surveillance and digital surveillance and hacking people and doing all kinds of things. We're not denying that. But it becomes very curious when there are elements of fact in a particular story that don't add up, that don't match the facts. It causes me to wonder why this person would be so adamant about protecting those false statements rather than digging into all the facts and details and finding the truth.
And that's exactly right. And that's what the media refused to do after Sheriff Arpaio and Mike Zullo held that first press conference
Right.
on March 1, 2012. They got mad, especially at the second press conference on July 17th that year. The media got mad. And I remember one journalist from a local CBS station in Arizona, they were saying, "How do you expect any of us to believe any of this?" Well, he's just shown you. He's shown you how all of this information came together, the trips to Hawaii, getting documentation together, showing, consulting with experts. This is how this happens. This is what an investigator does. And if we're not willing to do that and to find out what the truth really is, then we're not real reporters. You can call yourself a blogger. You can call yourself a columnist. You can call yourself an opinion writer, an editorialist, a pundit. You can use any of those things. But if you're going to insert your own opinion or your own agenda,
Right.
and that's the thing, I think so much journalism today is agenda driven, whether it's politically left, politically right. It's really not journalism, and we have to be very, very careful how we word things, the words that we use, whether or not we do check with all sides on the facts, try to gather as much documentation as we can, or are we accepting documentation that doesn't have any backup, really, that doesn't have any sourcing? Are we accepting that from one person who may or may not be a credible source? What are your source's credentials? What has he written? What has he proven? Where has he worked? What happened to his work history? These are things that are very important. You have to really check your sources. But if all you're trying to do is bolster your source in the public eye and in the court of public opinion, you're not doing journalism. And that's what the mainstream media did with the birth certificate. And the way they're going after these so-called whistleblowers now, they're bolstering them. What do these whistleblowers really have that the rest of us don't have now that the transcript of Trump's call with the president of Ukraine has been released? Do they really have anything, or do they just have a political agenda? Now, granted, these whistleblowers aren't pretending to be journalists, but the so-called journalists in the mainstream media are saying they're journalists, and they're not presenting both sides of the story, and they do everyone a great disservice. I will use a term that Mike Zullo used years ago now. I remember he did some kind of an update in the Maricopa County area. I believe the date was March 31, 2012, and he used the term gaslighting.
Right.
And I didn't know what that meant. I had to find out. And gaslighting is when the media tries to basically pull one over on the public, and they have a big mouthpiece, and as you say, millions of dollars in advertising. They have a lot of power. The media is very powerful, and they really should be responsible, but they're not. They've taken a side, and they've decided to go all in with the birth certificate, and then, as you say, to say, oh, it's been debunked. Who debunked it? Where's the report that says everything that Mike Zullo and Sheriff Arpaio did is debunked? I don't see one expert. There's not one expert who's ever said that or gone on camera and declared that. So the media is gaslighting us, and that's a very dangerous situation for us to be in. It's like Cuba or the Soviet Union, where all the stuff that's printed in the paper, maybe not all, we're not quite at that point where all, but we are at a point where the majority of the mainstream media mouthpieces are not giving us the full story. It's slanted and it pursues an agenda, and that's dangerous to a free people.
Absolutely. And you know, that gaslighting is exactly what I'm talking about. That's the social engineering. And you know, Sharon, I think you're far more generous than I am. I think we might be well past the point that Cuba or the former Soviet Union was ever at, because our lives today are so permeated by media, with the phones that we all hold and the interfacing with computers that we all do all the time. And I think that what you and I are doing as independent journalists and members of the media, particularly the type of reporting that we're trying to do either on Crowdsource the Truth or that you're doing on the Post and Email, which people can read at the Post email.com. We're trying to break through that social engineering, that gaslighting, and so we represent a particular type of threat to those that want this false information to basically fool everyone into thinking that the false information is true and that what you and I are saying is false. Mike has suffered from it, you've suffered from it, and we've heard about a lot of people being blocked from YouTube, being blocked from Twitter and Facebook. This is part of the reason why I created Crowdsource the Truth, and I've resisted corporate sponsorship. We rely on the sponsorship of the individual viewers, and that really goes a long way toward making sure there is no undue financial influence. You've had some of your own problems dealing with YouTube and some of the mainstream journalism sources and social media sources, so you've created a page on Brighteon, which is the video service started by Mike Adams, the health ranger, and you've actually posted our wonderful roundtable with Kevin Shipp and Mike Zullo and yourself on Brighteon, so people can search for the post and email, and I'll also include the link to this video in the description after we're done with our interviews. So again, I think it's important for people to remember that there are individuals inserted into this dialogue, this worldwide international social media dialogue, who are posing as journalists but are actually social engineers deliberately planting false stories. And certainly if they were obviously false, Sharon, if someone came out and started reporting on the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus, they wouldn't get much uptake in the general public. But if they are targeting the audience that's watching you and I, the audience that already realizes they're being lied to by the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. They've got this pool of individuals who are turning to the Post and Email or Crowdsource the Truth to find their information. They have a new challenge. They want to convince people who are already consumers of alternative sources of information that somehow what you and I is saying might be false.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think people have to be discerning when they read. They have to know the difference between an editorial and a newspaper article, an actual news article. And unfortunately, as you were talking, I was thinking the line between those two categories of writing has been blurred, in my opinion, beyond recognition today. The Post and Email, we have a separate column for editorial. It's clearly marked editorials. There's another category for state stories, which happen to be, kind of more local or state things, but that's news. And then national, U.S. government corruption, all of those categories, those are news. That's something where there's no opinion, unless I'm quoting someone I'm interviewing. That's a little bit different, or quoting someone from another newspaper source or something. But these lines have been blurred really beyond any visible recognition. And we have to go back. I think part of this, too, is the educational system. We're coming through, maybe those of us who are older, it's been a while since we were in public school or college, but the young people certainly are not getting an education, it would seem, in what is journalism, what is objective writing, what is an editorial, what should a term paper look like. Probably most of them don't know how to do the old-fashioned footnotes. They're doing it now on the computer, and these shortcuts are wonderful. We all use them, but we have to know the difference between real news reporting and opinion giving or opinion expressing. And even on the mainstream television stations, at Fox News, I mean, every time you look, they're having a roundtable, and it's opinion people.
Right.
It's columnists, right. And we need more facts. I think everything needs to be more factually driven, and you've got to really look very hard for that. And I hope that when people land on my site or anyone else's site, they will look very carefully, read the article. If you can tell, if let's say I'm the author, because it's a news article, normally it is I who wrote it. If you can tell one iota how I feel about that particular issue. I've failed in my job, and I want people to tell me. If you can tell which way I lean on that, that was my bad job. An editorial, again, it's completely different. The person can say what he or she thinks. It's an opinion piece. But we've really got to buckle down and go back to these basics. I really believe in that. And I believe in independent journalism. And that seems to be burgeoning on the internet. The internet's given us a wonderful tool to use and to report things that are just not going to be reported on the television or in mainstream newspapers, which are, not doing terribly well. Print
Right.
newspapers are doing horribly. And if you notice, almost all, I won't say all, but almost all the mainstream newspapers that are online now are taking subscriptions, either subscription or they kind of, not scream at you, but they insist that you turn off your ad blocker so that you can read their content. I don't have any of those restrictions. You can read my material for free any day. You can use an ad blocker if you wish. I'm independent, and my readers have been very, very generous over the years, though. I will be very clear. They've been generous and wonderful, but we don't need millions or even thousands of dollars to keep running, because I believe in this cause and I believe in real journalism. And I hope someday, as you said, it may be wishful thinking, but I hope that the Post and Email can reach millions and that people realize that we did adhere to principles regardless of how unpopular they might have been at the time.
Absolutely. And people can go to thepostemail.com and click on the donate tab to provide financial support either by PayPal or by sending a payment in the mail to the post office box in Canterbury, Connecticut. It's so important, Sharon, that people support independent journalism like this. I've noticed, just as you pointed out, sites like the Washington Post, the New York Times, they want me to pay to view the site, but then they also still have ads there. They also are still owned by people like Jeff Bezos. The New York Post is owned by the Murdochs, who are millionaires, and these guys seem to be linked to other things that the CIA and various foreign intelligence services have an interest in. So I don't know that people should be trusting those sources when you're dealing with something like the Post and Email, where clearly you're relying on the readership to provide the financial support, just as I do on Crowdsource the Truth. I can't do these shows without our viewers becoming sponsors by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. By doing that, you're able to make sure that the sponsors, the readers, they're the ones whose best interests are being served. If Jeff Bezos owns Amazon.com and he's got a $600 million cloud data services contract with the CIA, he might be more concerned with what the CIA thinks than with whatever somebody with a $10 a month subscription might think. But that's just a matter of opinion for people to decide. There's one more thing that I wanted to mention about this anonymous malicious complaint that was lodged against you. This is an extremely troubling personal attack because in addition to being purely false and unsubstantiated as the investigation revealed, this, if it had gone through, if for some reason you didn't respond or by some set of circumstances there was a judgment found against you, this would have prohibited you from being around small children or aging adults or people who are considered vulnerable. And you're certainly at the age where you could have grandchildren, you could have aging parents who need your attention. This is an incredibly insidious personal attack. And again, I'm not saying anything publicly about Mary Fanning on a personal level. I'm just saying she's obviously making false reports that indicate pure incompetence or deliberate lying, because we've presented the correct information to her and she refuses not only to modify her reporting, she refuses to even acknowledge that information. So I want people to really absorb how damaging something like this, an attack like this, could be against the right type of persons, could really have a negative impact on your personal life.
Absolutely. And to be clear, it was never in my mind that Mary Fanning filed the report. I'm quite sure it was not she.
And I don't mean
I,
to imply that. Sorry if I have.
Right, right. No, that's okay. Just to be very clear, uh, I don't believe she's a resident of the state of Washington, but even if she were, I do not suspect it was she. But yes, this can be very damaging. And if it's the person I suspect it is, there have been other false complaints filed. In that person's past against Mike Zullo, against a person running for governor of Nevada,
Wow.
uh, Jim Gibbons. This is all you can read about it in news reports. The AP did a report on this, and it resulted in an FBI investigation while he was running for governor. I mean, that hardly makes a level playing field. Although we do want to know about corruption. We do want to know that if someone is running for office and is corrupt, that's always important. We want to know. But it turned out to be completely unfounded that Jim Gibbons took bribes from someone and having to do with casinos and other things. But this was found to be completely unfounded. And he was elected governor of Nevada. He served for one term and was followed by Brian Sandoval. I don't remember what happened
But let
there.
me pause you for a second, Sharon, because what you've just raised is incredibly important. You see, it's a totally unfounded claim, just like the one brought against you. But in the case of Jim Gibbons, this unfounded claim remains an open question for voters while he's campaigning, and whether or not it's true, it could certainly have an extremely damaging effect on Mr. Gibbons' campaign, and that could change the fate for a lot of people in Nevada. This is an underhanded and malicious technique. We've seen a lot of people do things like this to just raise false accusations, and today in this world of the court of public opinion, just like you or I can use the internet to share information with people, malicious social engineers can use it to share false information to try to damage people, and by the time the target of this attack sorts it out, the damage may already be done.
Exactly. Case in point, look at what they did to 16-year-old Nicholas Sandman.
Right.
Because he and a group of his cohorts from the private Catholic school where he went, Covington Catholic, happened to be at the Capitol attending a pro-life rally, which is denigrated by the political left. I'm not being political. There's a political left, political right, and there's an in between and all points in between. But the left tends to attack people who are vociferously and quite visibly pro-life. Well, the young man had a MAGA hat, I guess Make America Great hat. Now, who says in this country that he cannot wear that hat, or that he can't wear a hat that says Boston Red Sox or New York Yankees or anything? There's no law. In fact, we cannot have laws like that, or even mores that say he can't wear that hat. We don't like him, so we're going to go up to him and we're going to vilify this young man who just stood there thinking, well, if I just smile and don't say anything nasty. I mean, what would we all do if we were 16 years old? If we could be terrified if someone approached us like that and started beating a drum in our face.
Yeah.
And here he has completely destroyed by the mainstream media at the age of 16. So this has got to stop. People have got to start being more responsible.
Yeah, and we should point out that in the case of Nicholas Sandman, the social engineers were the likes of CNN, the Washington Post. So I'm not just pointing the finger at Mary Fanning and Dennis Montgomery, although they do seem to be engaging, along with Dave Janda and the other people that are perpetuating these lies, rather than looking at the facts. We're talking about matters of fact, not matters of opinion, even things that have been contradicted by their own story within the context of what they've said. So again, they rely very much on gaining people's confidence, gaining people's trust, and just it's like identity politics. It's identity journalism. If they like a particular person, they want to believe whatever story they tell, and if they dislike another person, they want to discount whatever that person might say. We're getting close to the end of our hour here, Sharon. I do want to remind people that they should be visiting the Post and Email daily. You're doing excellent reporting over there, and people can find it at thepostemail.com. You've got everything broken out into editorials, government corruption, grand juries, the Horse Protection Act, the Obama birth certificate. So you've got a very specific focus, but government corruption certainly is an incredibly important topic, and some of these other topics are equally important. I like how you've got it broken down to those specific details so people can know what they can be finding when they click on those topics.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say the website design was not mine. It was done years ago when John Charlton still ran it. And I stuck with it because people seem to like it. We've had the site improved for mobile devices and things like that over the years, but it is a nice little site. It's my home on the internet, and I'm going to run the Post and Email as long as I possibly can. And I really enjoy what I do, and I sincerely hope that I can make some kind of small difference. I don't picture myself really ever being, someone with a huge reach, as you mentioned, with millions of readers. If it gets to that point, great. And if it doesn't, again, I'm going to stick to my principles, and I intend on finding out for sure who forged that birth certificate and why. Hopefully that will come out among many other things, and then keep concentrating on people's constitutional rights. This is what that really boils down to. If the birth certificate is a forgery, and the selective service form, as Mike Zula's investigation found, I mean, they declared that they are. I'm not doubting that. Yeah. But given that, I'd like to know why, and how is this going to be? How does restitution get made to Americans whose constitutional rights to a natural-born citizen president, if that's what it turns out to be, he isn't? How do we go forward from here? What do we do as a country? How do we wash this clean and start dealing honestly with each other again?
Absolutely. This forged birth certificate raises so many questions. How a document like this could have been shown to the American people and be presented as legitimate. I mean, it is so obviously forged when you look at it here. I just don't know how it can remain a question. I think most of the people that doubt the reporting about this dismiss it as racism. So, I mean, I guess we're racist against Adobe PDF documents because we're not saying anything about Barack Obama as a black man being suitable to be president. We're just simply questioning why a forged birth certificate would need to be presented if, in fact, he was born in Hawaii, as we're led to believe. And, of course, there's tons of evidence beyond this forged electronic document that cause this to be the belief. And this is another one of these topics that social engineers like to attack the messenger over rather than provide a legitimate scientific explanation for any of the questions that are raised relative to this document. And it's the same thing when we're talking about these FBI evidence receipts. It's the same thing when we're talking about the various points that Kevin initially raised and brought to my attention, and now Mary Fanning, Dave Janda, and this individual who might be Dennis Montgomery. I'm going to get yelled at for even saying that name, but I believe he is the individual who filed this complaint against you, Sharon, in the state of Washington, and that's my personal belief. That's a matter of opinion based on evaluating the evidence, so we'll leave it at that. I do want to remind people, Sharon, that they can subscribe to your newsletter by going to the Post and Email. They're going to get this little pop-up message that allows them to subscribe and stay in touch with you. They can also watch videos that you post on Brighteon.com. I'm going to be making this video available to you right after we're done, so people can follow you on Brighteon and they can support Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, and his effort to create an alternative video platform there. Was there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers, Sharon, before we wrap it up for today?
No, I very much appreciate the interview, Jason. It was a pleasure speaking with you again, and I wish you the best in all of your endeavors as well at Crowdsource the Truth.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and the same to you. I really appreciate having you on. I appreciate your insights, and as you said, your old school, straight to the facts reporting. People can get that over at the Post and email. I almost forgot to mention, people can also follow you on Twitter, and that's a great way to keep up with what you're doing. You're on Twitter at the Post email, so people can follow you there. They can also link to the website. I look forward to having you back on soon, Sharon, as soon as we have some more information to report. And thank you for joining me today. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you, Jason. Bye-bye.
And thanks everybody for watching. Take it easy.